Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, episode number 65. We are here on a, what is it, Jeff? Is it a Tuesday evening?
Tuesday evening.
Here on a Tuesday evening in frigid Michigan.
Frigid Michigan, another late night in the vomitorium.
Yes, this is where we belong, though. This is our home away from home, you might say.
That is true.
And we'd like to say thank you for listening. And what are we talking about this evening?
Tonight is one of the great kind of unsolved archaeological mysteries out there. This was the search for the lost tomb of Alexander the Great.
Okay.
Yeah, and I find this one particularly fascinating. It's unlike, I think when people think, archaeological mystery, they might think of like the Ark of the Covenant.
Yes.
I think this one, in many ways, is much more interesting. With the Ark of the Covenant, I think that you stop hearing about it after the Babylonian invasion.
Right.
It's reasonable to assume it was destroyed and melted down there.
Mm-hmm.
This one was a prominent feature of a major city in antiquity, and it's completely lost.
Completely missing.
Right. So it was a tourist attraction.
Right.
Right.
Now, before we get into it too deeply.
Yeah, sorry, I was getting ahead of myself.
That's okay.
Yep.
I was thinking, should we hum some Raiders of the Lost Ark tune here?
Like a little do-do-do-do.
I wasn't going to start out quite that high.
Oh, okay.
I'm more of a low Barry, I would say.
Barry White?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's get on to the shout out.
Okay, all right. So who do we got? Who's our shout out?
So this goes to Chris Rice, who was a student of mine about 3 or 4 years ago. You actually left our former institution right about the same time that Chris arrived.
I saw this name. It looked familiar to me, but I did not have him as a student.
Great student. So I named each of the students in my class with a Latinate name. I let them choose. Here's a proposal. Here's a suggestion.
Yeah.
You don't like it, too bad. No, you don't like it, we can change it. And so Chris was known as Oriza.
Oriza.
Oriza is the Latin word for rice. It's from a Greek word, oriza.
Yeah,
so Chris Rice, he writes, was a former classical languages major at Calvin University, currently lives in St. Louis, Missouri, and works as a pastor of a ministry that serves impoverished and unhoused men and women in the city of St. Louis.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Very noble. Classic. So he did double duty, Greek and Latin.
Yep, he took some Greek, took some Latin. I can remember exactly where Chris sat in my Latin course. Hard worker. I mean, this guy, he was committed, right?
Yeah.
He's since gone on to things that don't involve classics proper, you might say, but devoted listener to the classics and such a hard worker, real honest guy too.
Great.
I was very impressed with this young man. So
very, very cool. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks to Chris for listening.
Yeah, and keeping the flame alive,
absolutely.
Carrying the torch, or whatever it is that we say.
That's right.
So we got an opening quote, right?
Yeah, shall I tackle this one?
Yeah, well...
Or do you want to read this one?
I think you read the last 2 opening quotes.
Okay, so you feel like I'm kind of taking an advantage?
You're like an opening quote hog.
Okay, all right. Well, please, take care of this one, yes.
So this is from Andrew Chugg's book, The Lost Tomb of Alexander. It's Gardner's Books, 2004.
This was actually, it's Nicholas Saunders, Alexander's Tomb. So.
Hey, you're the one that wanted me to read this.
Oh, I just want you to be accurate, all right? Yes.
No, this is going to be your quote. I'm sorry. This is Nicholas Saunders, Alexander's Tomb, 2006. And Nicholas says, in the search for Alexander's tomb, we travel across the ancient world, witness extraordinary events, and encounter some of history's most famous and infamous figures. Along the way, from Macedonia to Mesopotamia, from Egypt to India and back again, we are ambushed by intrigue, deception, greed, and murder, seduced by astonishing wealth, drawn to military genius and extraordinary acts of bravery, repulsed by appalling brutality, and mystified by claims to divinity. Can I just pause for a minute?
Yeah.
This is like the intro to a movie.
It is like it's a movie trailer, isn't
Exactly.
it? Yeah, exactly. Who wouldn't want to see this?
I don't know.
Yeah.
We pick our way through contradictory accounts, intrigued. He used that word twice now, I have to say.
You're starting to cool to some
Yeah,
of this
sorry,
a little
Nick.
bit.
Intrigued and amused by the many personalities who claim to have discovered that is Alexander's tomb. We learn that archaeology can be hijacked to serve political ends.
Yes.
Can you unpack this for us a little bit, Dr. Winkle?
Well,
What's going on here?
So the bulk of the presentation we have tonight, I come from Saunders' book, Alexander's Tomb, and then also Andrew Chugg's book, The Lost Tomb of Alexander, which are, as I understand it, probably the most recent and best, more kind of popular introductions to this topic.
Okay.
I'd say that Saunders' approach is a bit more It's a
swashbuckling.
Well, it's actually not swashbuckling. It's a little bit more kind of, it keeps the topic at a distance. Where Chug is a little bit more interested. He's a little bit more conspiratorial.
All right,
and he kind of pushes the envelope. We'll see this at the end of our of today. So Saunders, I think, while he writes very much for the casual reader and grips their interest, he treats the topic in a much more kind of straight historical approach.
Okay,
Chug is more interested in kind of what's the dirt.
Right.
Yep.
But Saunders, he's a little more. How did you say?
I mean, he's a little bit more kind of straightforward in the way that he presents the
Less
topic.
Conspiratorial.
Right. Even though the language of this intro would not suggest that.
Okay. So what is it then that we are giving to the listener this evening, and the viewer, right?
And the viewer, right? We're gonna take them from the death of Alexander, to the current controversy. So the tomb has still not been found. Mm-hmm. This is one of these things that I wouldn't say many archaeologists are in pursuit of. I think a lot of archaeologists in this field today probably say it's not there. We're not going to find it. But it is one of these great unsolved mysteries. And both Saunders and Chug suggest, no, there are clues along the way, and it takes us from the death of Alexander in Babylon to Napoleon, through the conquest of the Muslims,
to Venice at some point.
To Venice,
we got to go to Venice.
Yeah, so that's where Chug's kind of his little conspiracy comes in.
So I went through an Alexander phase.
Yeah,
right after grad school, we all go through an Alexander phase, don't we?
We do. Well, you knew Peter Green, right?
Yes,
the great Alexander.
I was blessed to have him as an acquaintance. I wouldn't quite say friend, but so he was. I guess he was, what's the word I'm looking for? He was a catalyst to my Alexander phase.
Yeah.
So I read his book, Alexander de Actium, the biography of Alexander. I read something by Hammond. They're all in kind of the same genre, of course. They're the Alexander biography.
Yeah.
Different kind of approaches. So I read 3 or 4 on the topic, and then I kind of cooled off. I figured I know as much about that as I'd like to know for now.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
But the one thing that I do remember coming out of that is Peter's claim, Dr. Green, is that if the body of Alexander is intact, not dismembered or completely destroyed, it's floating around the sewers of Alexandria.
Yeah.
That's his takeaway from that.
Is that right?
Is that going to figure into tonight's?
Well, I mean, I think probably I think Saunders would probably say that if there is a chance, I think he'd probably agree with that. Chug has a different idea of the body may have been taken elsewhere.
Okay.
My sense, my own personal sense, is that the body was likely destroyed at some point. There's these huge gaps in the chronology. Okay. But I think I would say that I would agree with Green that if it is intact, that's where it's got to be.
Okay.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So we're going to give the listener a kind of soup to nuts tour.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
This is where Alexander started out at the time of his death in Babylon. Was it 323?
Yep.
And then just trace it kind of out, and at the end we're going to tell them this is where they can find it.
Yeah, exactly. Give some ideas of where it might be.
Grab your spade and your.
If you were interested, this
hat.
is where you might go poking around. Exactly.
You've got what, $50,000 to $100,000 lying around to outfit an expedition and buy the camels and the granola bars and.
Exactly. I often offer it as an extra credit for students. Nobody's taken me up on it yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's get down into it, shall we?
Right. So I think certainly on another episode or episodes, we have to cover the career of Alexander the Great.
Right.
But here we're starting at the end.
Okay.
Right. So June 10, 323 BC, Alexander, at the young age of only 32, he dies.
Okay.
And so his whole kind of military career, where he starts in Macedon and sweeps through all the way to India,
is
about 10 years.
Yes.
That's about it, right?
So it's 336, I believe.
Okay, so a little bit more than 10.
I think 336 is when Philip II dies.
Right, and he's only 18 or so, right?
Yeah, Alexander was born in no, he was 23. He was born in 359.
Okay.
He's 23 years old, and he lives for another 13 years, dies at the age of 36 in 323.
Okay.
So 6 major battles. Listener, check this on Wikipedia. I'm going from memory here, but gets right up to the Indus River, right, in the Indian subcontinent. He looks across the river, has some skirmishes there, an important battle.
Yeah.
And he realizes, or his men realize, this is a massively populated place. There's no way that 10,000, 30,000 Macedonians are going to subdue this mass of people. And so they mutiny, right?
Right.
And they head back. And then Alexander's army splits up.
Yes.
Into 2 different groups.
Right, exactly. And they also have this kind of brutal kind of death march, kind of back through what we would call Iraq and Iran.
That's right.
Where many people died. I mean, it's clear to me that Alexander, at some point, he reached a point where he had no idea what was over the next hill, right? He didn't know where he was going.
If I remember, the name of the Indian potentate was Porus, and over 7 feet tall.
So, is that right?
Right, and so just a really commanding figure for Alexander and his men. Now, they had marched, right? These Macedonians had marched, I don't know how many miles.
Thousands of miles.
From Pella, but they were exhausted. This was a multi-year campaign, and they just basically said, I'm not going any further. Apparently, Alexander wanted to go on and find the Silk Road. He wanted to go all the way into China because, of course, they knew about the existence of the Chinese people and the spice trade and so forth, but his men weren't interested.
Right.
He also founded, I believe, something like 27 different towns named after himself.
Right.
Alexandria.
It shows a lack of creativity,
no
in my
kidding.
opinion, right?
Yeah.
I dubbed this Alexandria.
Right.
Again?
Really? And Kandahar, right, as the listener might know, Kandahar, Afghanistan, is one of these Alexandrias. You can hear it in the name, Kandahar, Alexandria.
Oh, yeah.
That he actually founded. So Kandahar was in the news very much in the 90s and the early 2000s.
Yeah.
It's one of the cities Alexander founded.
Right. So there's a romantic anecdote that, when his men said, we're not going any further, Alexander is said to have wept because he had no more lands to conquer. Right. But it's also in that same area that his beloved horse Bucephalus, old cowhead, dies.
Right.
And so
devastating
to him.
He contracted a number of marriages along the way. Roxanne was one of his most famous brides.
Yes.
But she didn't have to turn on a red light.
I knew you were going there.
You did not.
I did too. All right, so I can't say with the word Roxanne without doing a police reference. I appreciate it.
Is it Police or Sting?
Police.
Okay.
Yeah, first Police album.
Is it Phil Collins or Genesis?
It depends on what song you're talking about.
Why do they have to do that? Pick a band and stick with it.
I agree, but these prima donnas want the solo fame.
Right.
So Phil goes on, Sting goes on, right, exactly.
So eventually you're going to have your own podcast?
Exactly, right. I'm already thinking about the break off.
Have all of the benefits, right, but none of the drag.
Exactly.
Get free of that ball and chain.
I might leave in the middle of this episode.
What would be your first, what would be your freshman album, right? When you're the post ad nauseum years.
It'd be a full episode of complaining about you.
Yeah, I can imagine. You need more than one episode. I got a name for you.
Please.
Esophagus.
That's not bad. You've thought about this.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'm working on one of my own. So in any event,
yes.
Roxanne, Bactrian woman, I believe,
right?
And so it wasn't an empire like we think of, say, the Roman Empire.
No.
I don't want to get too far afield here, as Alexander did, but go to a fortress, subdue it, extract its wealth, put a small band of Macedonian soldiers there, and move on.
Right.
But nothing connected, no extended tribute. He wasn't building railroads and, NFL expansion teams. It was just conquer and move on.
Right, which is it's so strange to me for such a clear military genius that he was. The way that he deals with the Persians at Granicus and Issus.
Yep.
Right, he doesn't seem to have had a plan for some kind of pulling it all together.
No,
whereas a Roman would say, okay, we've got to organize this, right? And
the consummate bureaucrats, the Romans,
right,
break and build. But it seems like Alexander could only break. There's not much building.
Right.
With the exception of these mass marriages, which is something for another episode.
Oh, yeah.
The mass marriages he tried to stage between Persians and Macedonians to create some kind of a master race. This is part of the Alexander romance, not history proper. Maybe,
right.
300 Macedonian grooms and 300 Persian brides. And, the way to defeat the Persians completely is to assimilate them.
Yes.
His men didn't care for that.
No. I mean, as I understand, this was a big part of the problem towards the end. So he comes limping back to Babylon, right? And he stays there. And his troops, his Macedonian generals, are kind of wondering, okay, what's the plan?
Right.
And I think as Plutarch talks about, they see him as kind of almost going native. He's dressing like a Babylonian Persian.
Well, his excuse, though, I mean, come on, Winkle. His excuse was, look, the only way I'm speaking like Alexander, the only way these, savage barbarian Persians are going to really respect me is if I dress like one of their leaders, like a potentate. And that's why they have to do proskynesis. They get to come and kneel before me, because that's what they do to their Shah, right?
Yeah.
To their king. So then he tried to make his Macedonian soldiers do that too. They were supposed to bow and scrape and kiss Alexander's ring when they came to his presence.
Right.
Now, was he really a megalomaniac? Did he think he had become God or something?
I think he was making it up as he was going along.
Definitely. I'm skeptical of that explanation. But his men were, quite upset by the whole thing.
Is there, so one of the final straws was when he starts giving the kind of the local Persian troops, raising them in rank and honor, as the same as the Macedonian troops, and the guys that had been with him the whole time are thinking, hey, what's going on?
Right. So there's two different ways to understand that. One is Alexander is a very enlightened, right? He has no bigotry of Macedonians are better than Persians. The other way, I think, is more likely. Just he's an opportunist. And making it up as he goes along.
Yeah.
But his men certainly had no sense of enlightenment. They were deeply angry and hurt that these Persians were being promoted above them.
Right, exactly.
But back to the body.
So he dies under still mysterious circumstances.
Dengue fever?
Was it? Yeah, exactly. Was
malaria?
Did he drink himself to death?
Right. Was it syphilis? The venereal diseases are always popular.
Right. He was poisoned.
It's not a joke.
Possibly. Syphilis, always popular?
Well, okay. The most interesting story, though, is that poison was smuggled in a horse's hoof.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Perfect container. Who would suspect?
No.
I always carry a horse's hoof.
Nobody says, where are you going with that horse's hoof?
No, definitely. But if there's poison secreted inside, and then I guess you mix it into Alexander's wine spritzer or something like that.
Yeah, his wine cooler.
Right, he goes right past the umbrella.
Right.
And boom, poison.
Nobody's the wiser.
No.
Right. So according to the traditions, it's not in whatever he dies from. It's a bit drawn out.
Right.
People are coming. It's clear that the end is approaching.
Right.
And
he's laying in bed.
He's laying in bed.
Right.
But there's no plan. Okay, what are we going to do with all of this territory? What are we going to do with all of these 24 Alexandrias?
Right.
Right.
And his generals gather around? Mm-hmm. We going there?
Yeah, right. Exactly. And his cavalry commander,
okay,
by the name of Perdiccas,
right,
apparently says to him, the kind of the question everybody's wondering, like, okay,
who's next?
Who's next?
Right.
To whom do you leave your kingdom?
Right. And he puts his hand on his cheek and he says,
kind of like the Godfather.
Let me tell you something. And he gives a signet ring, or he holds out the signet ring, right? Mm-hmm. And he says, "This belongs to whoever can take it."
Yes, to the strongest.
Right.
Right.
Like the not unlike the golden apple. Right?
Yes.
Thrown out onto the dance floor at the wedding of Peleus and Thetis.
To the fairest.
Calliste, to the loveliest.
Right.
And of course, we know from Plutarch that Alexander slept with a dagger. It's one of my favorite stories. I'm sure I've told it on air before. With a dagger and a copy of the Iliad under his pillow.
Oh, yeah.
Right? If he needed to slice an apple, right?
He's got it right there, his paring knife.
Right. And a copy of the Iliad because he wanted to surpass the exploits of Achilles. So I bet the To the Strongest was inspired by the golden apple idea.
Sure, right.
But who took it?
Well, it's all up for grabs, right? I mean, add to this problem is there's still the question, well, is there if it's not going to be one of the generals, if it's not going to be one of the strongest, is there an heir in the family? Roxanne is pregnant, but she's not a Macedonian. So is this child legit from a Pella point of view?
Right, the red light district.
Yes, exactly. Right. So he's got a half brother back home, Philip III. Would that be a natural? But that's not going to fly either.
Was this the Philip that was thought to have been physically weakened, congenitally weakened?
Yes.
Philip III?
Yes.
And his tomb is at Vergina,
It
right?
is. Yep. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So that was, if it was going to pass to him, it would be a figurehead only, right? And his mother's still alive. Olympias is back there. Maybe she's going to be pulling the puppet strings.
Angelina Jolie.
Yes, from the
Oliver Stone movie.
Yes.
What did you think of that movie?
Awful. I don't think I couldn't make it through.
The cinematography was outstanding.
It was outstanding, but
massive vistas shot on location.
But that guy, who's the guy who plays Alexander, the Irishman?
Oh yeah,
who plays Colin somebody?
No,
it's not Colin Firth.
No,
oh,
I'll think of it.
Gosh.
I have succeeded in forgetting about him.
Yeah,
altogether. But I think Philip is played by Val Kilmer.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Val Kilmer plays his father,
Philip II.
That's correct.
That's right.
Most underrated general of antiquity.
I would agree with that.
According to Peter.
Yeah.
Peter Green.
Yeah.
Olympia and I can't remember that guy's name. In any event, To the Strongest.
Yes.
But who's the candidate? Ghost on the Throne. I think you've read that, right?
Jamie Rahm's.
Yeah, the Ram book is about this question: who's going to succeed?
Yes, right.
Antigonus, the one-eyed, versus Perdiccas, right?
Right. And this is where the body comes into play.
Okay.
Really. So
Are we up to the body?
yeah, we're getting to the body. So I think in the way that certainly that Saunders and Chug kind of painted is that the idea is that nobody's going to back down. They all want the territory. They all want the prestige of taking Alexander's place. All of the generals. Perdiccas.
They're warlords, right?
Yeah, exactly. Ptolemy, Olympias' mother back home, Seleucus, Antigones.
Cassander, don't forget Cassander.
Don't forget Cassander.
Everybody always forgets Cassander.
But the idea seems to be that whoever gets the body and gets to bury the body has a kind of a claim of legitimacy that nobody else can have. So they all want the body.
It's a talisman.
Yes, right. So it's not. It's in some ways it's less about the signet ring. It's about okay, who gets to legitimately bury Alexander.
But why would the body confer any kind of legitimacy on the owner of the body?
Well, I think it's
They're gonna prop him up at events, like Weekend at Alex's kind of thing.
well, I mean, the way that the tomb ends up, I mean, people could file through and see the mummified body.
Right.
You know, if you had enough clout, you could touch the body.
Yeah.
So I think the presence of the body, it's almost becomes like a statue in a temple. It's the presence of the god, right? You know, he had been declared a son of the god at the oracle, right, in Egypt that told him he was the son of Jupiter. And so to have Alexander is to have kind of a god amongst you.
Right.
And so I think that comes into play.
So enter Ptolemy at this point.
So he wants to, he heads off for Egypt.
Right.
As I always understood, he kind of recognized that Egypt, if we're going to divide this thing up, that's kind of the plum.
Okay.
That's the prize. That's where kind of the Alexandria of the Alexandrias is. And he recognized that's going to be a lucrative position, a powerful position. But he also goes there thinking that he's secured an agreement that the body's going to come back there. So he thinks, okay, I'm going to head to Egypt. I'll get the body, and that will kind of that will solidify my power base. Right. So, however, other guys are kind of pulling strings and making arrangements. Perdiccas, his cavalry commander, he apparently gets Olympias, Alexander's mother's support back in Macedonia, and says, no, we're going to bring the body back to the family tombs at Vergina.
The one who slept with Zeus before she gave birth to Alexander.
Exactly.
According to tradition.
Exactly right.
Okay.
And so he's going to be buried there next to his father, Philip II, whose tomb has been found.
Correct.
And so everything seems to be kind of going in that direction. And so it's kind of down to these two guys are kind of struggling over the body.
Now, Ptolemy was a boyhood friend, right, of Alexander?
Yes.
Student of Aristotle.
Right.
And it was this Ptolemy who wrote the authoritative biography of Alexander during his time in Alexandria.
Yes.
Much later on in the story.
Right. Lost.
That's lost.
Yes.
Right. But there are a number of Alexander histories based on Ptolemy's original.
Exactly right. So the body starts. They're going to take it in this grand procession, and they load it onto a catafalque, a large a catafalque.
Okay.
A large scaffolding chariot thing to carry the body, and apparently this was an elaborate, almost like a mini temple wagon being. It's not very subtle. So
what kind of a word is that? Do you know?
I looked it up. So you know the kata is the Greek.
Kata, and then the falque.
Apparently, it's like an old French for meaning like a bench or a scaffolding.
Okay.
Like a sideboard.
It's a moving sideboard
Yes.
on which you put the body of a deceased potentate.
Exactly.
I'm always looking for definitions.
Yeah.
Anthony Hopkins.
What about him?
In the Oliver Stone, Alexander the Great.
He's in that too? Why don't I
He
remember
is
any of
Ptolemy
this?
right at the end.
Oh, okay.
He's telling the whole story.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
Ptolemy right at the end.
Gotcha.
So the thing was loaded with good actors.
Right, but sometimes that doesn't.
bit of a dud.
It doesn't work. It's like a super group that just it doesn't put out very good music.
Right.
Yeah.
Like when Janet Jackson and
Who did she get together with?
never mind. Previous episode.
Anything Sammy Hagar's done after Van Halen would fall into that category.
Okay.
Right.
So Ptolemy makes arrangements.
Yes. So he's bribing people. He's paying off. He has to pay off, and so there's a certain Aridaeus.
Okay.
He's in charge of the whole catafalque.
Okay.
And so it makes me think of like Lincoln's funeral procession.
Yes.
So the train going from
Dragged on and on.
to D.C., making its way to Springfield.
Right.
And people would know it's coming, and so they stand by to watch it.
Right. Throw flowers and so forth. And
Exactly right.
It was a public event, a major public event.
So I think this had to be something like this. And so, Alexander's death, the news of that must have rippled throughout the territories. And probably lots of people came to watch this huge rolling catafalque go by.
Parade.
Right. So Ptolemy pays off the head of the guy who's in charge of this procession.
Arrhidaeus.
And they reach a certain crossroads, and instead of going north to Macedon,
flips the switch on the train track.
He does exactly, just like
and
that.
there it goes
Boom!
off down the wrong direction.
It's going south towards Egypt. And Ptolemy he said he rides north with an army. He intercepts it and makes sure it kind of makes its way to Egypt.
Brings it back to Egypt. The body of Alexander now in Ptolemy's possession.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Perdiccas finds out about this. He's furious, as you would expect him to be. And
Habeas corpus.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
You got to have the body.
Gotta have the body.
Right.
And so he marches on Egypt, but it's a disaster for him. He himself is assassinated. His soldiers are massacred. Plutarch tells us
Perdiccas.
Perdiccas, sorry.
Right.
Yeah. Perdiccas he's assassinated. His soldiers are wiped out, swept away in the Nile, eaten by crocodiles.
It's a bad way to go.
It's a bad way to go. And so now Ptolemy has the body all to himself.
Okay.
Right? And by all accounts, it never leaves his possession from here. Now it bounces around, and I think it's worth saying that there's a lot of gaps. We don't know exactly what's going on here. There's rumor, there's kind of half facts here, so we're going to do the best we can.
Okay, there's no photographic evidence, obviously. There's no DNA, no forensic kind of stuff.
Right.
A lot of speculation.
A lot of speculation. So it seems Ptolemy's plan, which he ultimately carries through, he's going to bring the body to Alexandria, which was going to be the crown jewel of whatever this empire is, right?
Right.
But of course, it's not ready there. There's nothing built, and so he's got to find temporary digs for this body. And so, to the best of our knowledge, he finds a vacant tomb down in Memphis, not Tennessee.
He was walking in Memphis?
He was walking in Memphis, right?
With his feet 10
feet off a Beale.
A Beale.
Yeah.
Whatever that is.
Beale Street, famous for blues.
Okay.
Right.
And he finds a vacant tomb.
Right. So, and it was
tools in there.
Yeah, so this tomb was reserved for the last native pharaoh of Egypt, a certain Nectanebo II.
Of course.
But he was never buried there, right? But there was a sarcophagus waiting to go,
right?
And so we'll just put Alexander in that tomb.
Tuck him away
until it's ready to go. And this is where I think it's in the Chug book where he details that this tomb has been found.
Okay.
And outside it is kind of the semicircle of Greek statues, which seem the seven stages.
That's
of
highly
Greek.
suggestive.
Very highly suggestive.
Yes.
Why would you find that in a pharaonic tomb?
No,
right?
you wouldn't.
And so,
unless it were this is the implication, right? It were the temporary holding spot of Alexander's body.
Exactly. Right. So, beyond that, there's no inscription saying, Alex lies here or anything like that. But the idea that you have these Greek statues facing the tomb suggests that, okay, this recognizes Alexander is there. Was he buried there first? That's Chug suggests that's where he was, and that's where he stayed for many, many years.
Okay.
Yep.
So let me just summarize.
Yes.
Alexander dies in 323 in Babylon.
Yep.
His body then is fought over by the generals like Cassander, Antigonus, Seleucus, Ptolemy. Ptolemy makes an agreement that he's going to get the body. He goes back to Egypt. But then who double crosses him? Is it Perdiccas?
Well, Ptolemy really double crosses Perdiccas
by intercepting the body.
And
paying off Arrhidaeus and the catafalque.
Yes, right.
Takes the body back, stuffs it in a temporary tomb, Nectanebo II.
Yes.
Where it will lie in state until something more elaborate is prepared. Is that the idea?
Right. So Alexander's body stays there for, we don't really know how long it's there.
About 100 years.
About 100, well...
Nectanebo II.
It's something like that. So we know that Ptolemy himself, he dies in around 282.
Okay.
His son Philadelphus brings the body to Alexandria sometime 220s maybe.
Right.
Something like that. Buries it in a temporary tomb there in Alexandria. And then it's in 215 that he is magnificently placed in his final resting place. And so that's over 100 years after Alexander.
215.
215.
Okay.
That this massive edifice and enclosure, central part of the city where Alexander is buried and gains the name, it's usually called the Soma, the body.
Right.
Or sometimes it's referred to as the Sema, the big sign.
Like Jesse Ventura, right?
The body.
Yeah,
exactly.
Jesse the Body Ventura.
Exactly right. Right. So so this is where he is put to rest.
Okay.
And this is where kind of the mystery really begins.
Okay.
Right. So one of the I find the most fascinating parts about this is that it was this massive enclosure, huge edifice. It was a tourist attraction for throughout the Roman Empire.
So from 215 on
to about the 4th century AD.
Oh, so we've got almost 600 years.
600 years.
Good 500 years.
Right, and we have lots of recordings of famous people visiting the
Julius
tomb.
Caesar.
Caesar,
Right.
right. Augustus.
Yes,
Hadrian, Caligula.
everyone wants to be Alexander.
Right. And so lots of people are going to Alexandria just to see this thing, and it completely disappears. Now, I'm not an archaeologist. I've never been to Alexandria, Egypt, but my understanding is that Alexandria, Egypt, the modern city, in many ways bears very little resemblance to the ancient city. Like even like how in Rome, like the Corso follows the Via Flaminia.
Yes.
Right. And so
you can see the sketch of where things would have
yes,
been.
Exactly. Now, as I understand it, modern Alexandria it's almost a completely different city on top of the ancient ruins. So it's very difficult to do archaeology there.
Right.
And to even locate something in the modern city of approximately where something in the ancient city would have been. And so that's part of the problem of even knowing where to start to dig.
So what do you think about this body being here, though? Isn't that a little bit creepy? And people coming to see the body? Anecdote.
Anecdote?
I got an anecdote.
Please
here for
do.
you while
Yeah.
you think about that question.
Yeah.
The breakup of the Soviet Union, right? 1989, 1991. The Berlin Wall comes down in 89, around Christmas. I remember it well.
Yep.
Move on to around 1991, Soviet Empire is breaking up. I'm a freshman, first-year student at then Calvin College.
Yes.
And we have, the deskie, the person who sits at the desk of the dorm.
Right.
Welcomes you into the dormitory and hands out your mail and so forth.
Yep.
And a friend and I put a sign-up sheet there on the desk to accompany us on our tour to see Lenin's tomb, Lenin's body there in Moscow at the Kremlin before it was dumped in a ditch or something like that. This is just a joke, entire spoof.
Yeah.
People started signing up.
I want to go.
I want to go and see this body before it's. And so then we started adding options, right? Do you want the Cuban package, right? We'll also, stop by Cuba, check for cigar or no cigar.
Visit Fidel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do a whole tour.
Nice.
We're trying to just, have a laugh and make fun a little bit of communism and its collapse.
Yes.
Eventually, the RD, the resident director of the dormitory, had to say, "You people are taking this too seriously. You got to knock it off."
Really? It was
Canceled it.
really?
Yes.
Pulled the sheet?
Pulled the sheet.
Oh,
tore
man.
it right up from the desk, and that was exciting. But it's kind of creepy. These people filing past Lenin's body.
Right.
What, 70 years after his death, something like that?
What's even creepier is it didn't get dumped in a virus pile. It's still there.
Well,
You can still see it, right? But that's exactly what it makes me think of filing past Lenin's embalmed body.
Right, Alexander. People are visiting it. It's a shrine. They're paying homage.
Yes, and he's mummified in the Egyptian like a pharaoh,
Yes.
like a god king.
Coat hanger up the nose, pull the brain
Pull
out.
the brain out.
Stuff whatever they put in there to preserve it.
Yeah.
It's not far off. I mean, it's not a coat hanger, but
No, another anecdote.
Let's hear it.
Back in the day, I took a communications class, a speech class, right? And one of the speeches you
at
had
the same institution?
yes,
Okay.
right. And you had to do a how-to speech, and so people are doing like how to sew a shirt, how to change the oil, and I did how to mummify a body. And I remember the coat hanger.
And?
Yeah.
What was your grade?
They loved it. Killed.
Right.
It killed.
Funny.
Yeah.
Were you able to preserve their attention?
I did.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
exactly.
Speaking of paying homage,
Yes.
it's time
It is time.
for commercials.
Yes.
Time to go to the break. This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by Hackett Publishing. With offices in Cambridge, Massachusetts and Indianapolis, Indiana, Hackett has been bringing high-quality, affordable translations to a mass market for, more than 40 years now.
Yes.
Jeff, what do you like about Hackett?
I like the affordability.
Yes.
I love the quality of the translations. I was just reading just yesterday.
Don't give me Euripides Bacchae again.
No. This is actually the copy of Ovid's Metamorphoses, which we
right.
referenced in a recent episode.
Yes.
And beautiful cover.
Yes.
Just a quality package. Really readable, accessible translations. It's great stuff.
Highly idiomatic, but not loose, free, or inaccurate.
Right. And that's a difficult needle to thread.
It absolutely is. And let's be honest also, so grateful for Hackett's support of this podcast.
Yep.
People do a lot of complaining. I understand. I feel it about how the classics are under assault, so on and so forth. Not so popular in certain precincts. Hackett stepped up and said, hey, we're going to continue to promote high quality classics of the Western tradition, plus lots of other stuff.
Yes.
And support this broadcast.
Yeah. The term happy warrior, I think, describes Hackett very well to me. They're engaged. They're keeping that torch lit.
Absolutely.
Yes, unapologetically bringing the classics to another generation.
That's right. They got the Lingua Latina per se Illustrata series, which I love so much. They got several different editions of Plato's Republic, the Reeve translation, worth checking out, a new series of Aristotle. They have the Shakespeare editions. Great stuff.
Great stuff.
So what should the listener do?
So check
and the viewer.
And the viewer, right. They should go to hackettpublishing.com
Right.
and find the text that they want. And then put them in your little grocery baggie. Yep. And then type in the code AN2021.
That's right.
And what will that give them?
Well, we'll flash that on the screen here, AN2021. It will give them 20% off, which, if I'm not mistaken, is nearly 1/5. Yeah. And
free shipping.
Free shipping. Check it out.
This episode of Odd Nauseam also brought to you by Ratio Coffee. Ratio Coffee, based in Portland, Oregon.
That's right.
Mr. Mark Helwig has done it.
Yes, he has. What has he done?
He has solved all your brew-based problems.
Not just the brew-based. It not only makes a delicious cup of coffee.
Yeah.
I had a whole pot this morning.
You drank the whole pot?
Of course. I'm one of the only coffee drinkers in my villa, you might say.
Oh, is that right?
And I love it. So
yeah.
I had a delicious, delicious morning with the Ratio 8.
The 8. That's right.
That's right. Solves your brew problems and your aesthetic problems.
Yes. I got the Ratio 6. It's a great-looking machine. I have to split a pot every morning.
With Mrs. Winkle.
Yes, we compete over it.
Yes, but you're happy, right? It's a
very
happy competition.
Absolutely.
So the hot water comes up through the metallic veins, goes down into the cone, off-gassing all of the noxious CO2 with its...
That happens in the bloom stage.
Is that the bloom stage?
Yes.
Do I even operate this machine? The brackish tang escapes.
It escapes. It's bloom.
Bloom.
Followed by the...
brew.
And then it's...
Ready.
It's ready.
We got 2 LED lights, and then you got a great cup of joe right there in your hand.
That's right.
So we have 2 special things to say this week about Ratio.
We do.
First of all, you can get the standard coupon code for 15% off the 6 or the 8, and that code is...
ANCO.
ANCO, and this is big news, for the next 3 episodes, this one, 65, 66, and 67, we are going to be reading a special code. Not here during the ad. You're going to have to listen to the rest of the episode.
Should I say it right now?
No,
okay,
not
sorry.
now.
No, okay, right.
Torture them.
Right.
They got to wait till later. And then if you go to ratiocoffee.com/ANCO, put that on the screen, and you enter the number, which I'm going to give later, you'll be entered in a drawing to win your own Ratio 6.
And no cost to enter.
No cost.
No.
Nothing.
Excellent.
No. And you can therefore enter 2022 not drinking the bilge water, but drinking actual excellent coffee from your Ratio 6.
Check it out. You won't regret it. This episode of Odd Nauseam also brought to you by the Moss Method for learning Greek. Dave, tell us a little bit about the Moss Method.
Yes, so the Moss Method, thank you, Jeff, is a program that I have developed for anyone to learn Greek. I have students studying, they're about ages 12 and 13. I have students studying who are octogenarians, up there pushing the 80s.
Wow.
The Moss Method takes you from neophyte to...
erudite?
Exactly.
Yes.
So Charles Melville Moss wrote this first Greek reader in the 1890s. I've taken it and I have divided it up into 4 modules. And it takes you through every step of the Greek language. Alphabet, syllabification, accents, teaches you all the grammar, word by word, phrase by phrase, the whole 9 yards. But it's fun.
It's fun.
Yes. Do you want to know why?
Why is it fun? How could that be fun?
It's fun because you're reading actual stories the first day of class.
So you're reading Greek right from the beginning.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's not learn a rule, apply a rule with a couple sentences, and then forget about it. You're reading stories from the beginning.
That sounds
but
great.
I'm there helping you. It's expert, self-paced, accessible.
Excellent. So you yourself are accessible. That's part of the accessible part?
No flanky. I'm there every week for
Awesome.
an hour. The Moss Method office hours, the Moffis hours, on Zoom, 1 hour per week, answering questions about Herodotus and New Testament and Plato and anything you like.
Whatever they throw at you.
Whatever they throw at me.
Yeah.
So you need to go, please, listener, to mossmethod.com. Watch the free instructional videos. You can learn a lot of Greek for free, or you can sign up for the course, $2.99 per module. Now, the Black Fry Monsai has expired.
Oh, I don't. I wanted to say that again.
Go ahead and say it.
The Black Fry Monsai no longer available?
Has expired.
Okay.
We'll have a Christmas sale or a New Year's sale. But
Excellent.
This one has expired, but you can still sign up and get lots of Greek. So you really ought to check it out.
Mossmethod.com.
That's right, mossmethod.com. But 2 more brief announcements.
Okay.
First of all, I am teaching a course on Cicero's De Natura Deorum, The Nature of the Gods.
Ooh, excellent.
It starts in January, and as of this recording, there's 1 more spot remaining of the 10 who will interact with me live, viva voce.
Okay.
But if that's filled, you can also audit the course at a highly reduced price, $75. You get 10 episodes, 10 hours worth of instruction where I'm teaching these other students. You can watch, follow along, take notes, plus you get unlimited ad libitum interaction with me after class.
That sounds great. So 1 slot left for the...
1 slot for the Viva Voce, the in-person, but anybody can audit it and enjoy Cicero's brilliant prose. So go to latinperdiem.com, click the banner ad, and you'll see the material there so you can enroll in this course as an audit. And finally, the LLPSI, the Lingua Latina Per Se Illustrata, Latin teaches itself. Big program launching in January, so stay tuned.
So more information coming.
That's right.
Excellent.
All right, Jeff, so as we get back into it now, the body of Alexander is in Alexandria, in the possession of the Ptolemaic dynasty.
Yes.
Temporarily in the tomb of Nectanebo II.
Right.
And the years around 215, 200.
And now it's finally in its massive new enclosure.
Okay.
Right.
So it's out of Nectanebo II.
Yes, exactly right.
It's in the large pyramidal thing that the Ptolemy family built.
We think.
Okay. Right.
So as we were saying, this is part of the oddity that apparently it was this massive enclosure,
right?
A massive tomb. People are coming from all over to see it, and it's completely disappeared. And the very just vague descriptions of what it looked like.
So it was there from approximately 215, you said, to almost the 4th century?
We think so.
So mid-300s or so?
Something
perhaps.
like that, right.
And it was, apparently it was a thalos. It was a circular tomb.
A circular base with some kind of pyramidal top.
Right.
That's what we think. And so...
and if I may, if a rooster laid an egg on the top of that tomb, which side would it roll down?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay, never mind. It's a riddle you tell children.
Oh, it is?
Roosters don't lay eggs.
Oh, okay. I completely missed that one.
Try it out on your kids.
I'll try that. Right.
Okay, which side does it roll down?
So Chug talks about, okay, well, if it doesn't exist and we have these vague descriptions, how can we get a better idea of what it might have looked like?
Right.
And so his idea is that we might look at some of these imperial tombs that come later.
In the Hellenistic era.
Yes.
Got it.
In the Hellenistic era and into the Roman era, if you or even tombs that even predate Alexander. So he suggests that we know that Alexander visited Cyrus the Great's tomb.
Yes.
And that survives.
It does, yes.
Yeah. And so
we should throw a picture up of that at this point. So
we
should.
What
it looks like.
Yes. So he suggests that maybe when Alexander's sweeping through, he's thinking, I might want to be buried in that fashion.
He's taking notes.
Right. So you have kind of the stepped base with a kind of triangular top on the above it.
It's kind of like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of like these tombs are a miniature of what you might find in a cemetery, but on a massive scale.
Yes, exactly.
There's no functionality to it, typically.
Right. Exactly right. Others have suggested maybe the mausoleum of Halicarnassus, which also doesn't survive, but we have a better idea of what it looked like.
Mausoleus is the man's name.
Yes, right. From which we get our term mausoleum, right?
His wife Artemisia, the statues of which are in the British Museum.
Yes.
The massive, colossal statues.
Yeah, exactly.
He was the first one, if I'm not mistaken, to build this wedding cake style tomb for himself and the members of his family.
Yes, right.
The audaciousness of Hellenistic imperialism is the idea.
Right, looming above the harbor there.
Correct.
Others have suggested, we know emperors such as Hadrian and Augustus both visited the tomb of Alexander.
Right.
And they went to build these massive tombs for themselves.
Right. The Castle San Angelo is the tomb of the mausoleum of Hadrian.
Yeah.
And the listener might know that Augustus's mausoleum was recently restored and is now open.
At long last.
Yes, right by the Areopagus.
It was a dump.
Total
It might still be I think they're still working on it.
Well, I think it's going to open soon. It's been vastly restored.
It was it was so strange to me that was such a neglected monument. Like the last time you and I were there, it was
correct.
Broken beer bottles all over it.
And that was 16. Now, I was there in both 17 and 18, so even in 18 it wasn't.
Was still...
But they were working on it.
Okay.
So I am so eager to go back to Rome and see this.
Yeah, me too.
Right by the Areopagus there.
So could Hadrian and Augustus have wanted to model their own tomb on Alexander? So that's this. I mean, there's no record of that written, but that's the suggestion.
It's a very clever suggestion. It's a very plausible idea.
Right. So, I mean, other things that we know that Alexander was first buried in a solid gold coffin.
Yes.
But 89 BC rolls around, and one of the later Ptolemies is in desperate need of cash. he's got to pay some angry troops.
Right.
So he melts this down, strikes coinage, and pays it off.
If only he could have printed paper money.
I know.
It would have been much easier.
Right.
What about the stories that his body, the body of Alexander, inside that golden tomb or that glass tomb, the body was encased in honey?
I haven't heard this one.
That?
No.
Some preservative. The entire body was entombed in honey because then, it wouldn't corrupt at all.
Sounds tasty.
Yeah. Okay, moving on.
So this later Ptolemy who melts down the gold coffin, apparently he's the one who replaces it with this glass coffin that you can see the body through, and this apparently lasts for a very long time.
Is this the inspiration for the late 70s television dance show?
Which one?
Solid Gold.
Solid Gold. Oh, do you remember that?
Of course.
Marilyn McCoo.
I don't know who was on
all these bands lip syncing their hits.
I was a child.
You were?
Yeah.
I remember Solid Gold. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would like to think so.
Cut.
Yeah, very deep cut.
All right.
So this sets up the string of famous visitors, and so the Romans come along. They incorporate Egypt into their empire. We know Julius Caesar comes by. He comes to Alexandria, and he's wowed by the city.
Of course.
Right? He goes back to Rome and says, "But Rome's a dump.
Right.
And we got to change this." But then he's killed before he can realize his plans.
But then Augustus takes over.
Right. And so
from brick to marble.
Right. So Alexandria becomes kind of this benchmark of for guys like Caesar, but guys like Augustus, of what Rome should aspire to. Mm-hmm. So Augustus goes through. I mean, there's that wonderful, awful story where Augustus requests that the coffin be opened, and he reaches out to touch the face of the body.
Really?
Yeah, and then the nose breaks off.
I've never heard this story.
Yeah.
Where's this from?
I can't remember where it's from, but it's
a Marx Brothers film or something?
It's so great. You have to imagine all of these dignitaries standing around, and he reaches out to touch the face of Alexander, and off comes the nose.
Comes off. It's like the Three Stooges.
Exactly.
Or worse.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Caligula comes by. He takes Alexander's breastplate for himself.
And an ear, maybe?
Right. That's so Caligula, isn't it? Vespasian, Titus, Hadrian, they're all coming by to pay homage. And so this goes on.
What about Septimius Severus?
Oh,
that's where we're headed next.
That's where he's headed next, right? So you get to the early part of the 3rd century. Severus comes by, and he's horrified about how many people are just filing through.
Right. It's the Severan dynasty.
Yes.
200 AD.
It's like a subway stop. People are just kind of walking through past the body. He says, this cannot be. So he's the one who seals it up. No more visitors, and throws in a bunch of the magical papyri, other things that he disapproved of.
Things that belong to the Egyptians.
Yep, seal it up.
Is this some reading for Alexander? Is that the idea? Is it like a Egyptian burial in that sense?
Maybe something like like you can take it with you.
Right.
Perhaps
not said facetiously, but authentically.
Exactly. Right. And then here's where we start to get some serious gaps in our knowledge. It's just there's no mention of the tomb for the next century. And then 3rd and 4th century of Alexandria, we're starting to see the spread of Christianity.
Okay.
And a lot of pushback against these pagan temples. And you can see why some early Christians wouldn't like a tomb of a god king in their midst.
Right.
And so there are there's wars, there's sieges, there's natural disasters, there's anti-pagan riots, there's tsunami. And so I think my sense is that most archaeologists who are interested in this question think it's at this time that the tomb is destroyed and the body is probably lost.
Dumped in the sewer.
Okay. Right.
And this is what's the years we're dealing with now?
We're talking 4th century. So the last possible reference to the tomb comes from a kind of in a fragment of a kind of an anti-pagan speech by Archbishop Gregorius.
Is it Georgius?
Georgius, sorry.
That's okay.
And this dates to the year 361. And in his fiery polemic, he says, "How long shall this tomb stand?" And the idea is that he's referencing to this, maybe even standing in front of it. Like,
right.
You know, how long will we let this pagan monument sit
It's
here?
been almost 600 years.
Right.
Let's put it to rest.
And then maybe it's after this that the tomb is burned down in one of these clashes. Right. And so then it's gone for several centuries until we get to about the 600s, and we start to see the rise of the Muslim Caliphate.
Right.
Right. So I think Muhammad dies in the year 632, but the caliphate that succeeds him sweeps through Egypt, throughout North Africa, and puts it under the banner of Islam. And this is where both Chug and Sanders kind of pick up the story, and they say that this is where Alexander kind of rears his head in an interesting way once again. Alexander's memory amongst the Muslims seems to be a much more favorable one than under the early Christians.
Okay.
And so they venerate Alexander, and they call him in Arabic the Zulkarnain, the two-horned one.
Okay.
And so
This is because on his coinage.
right. So he's depicted as the god Ammon.
That's right. Zeus Ammon.
Zeus Ammon.
So in Libya, there was a shrine or an oracle to one of the Zeuses, the local Zeus Ammon.
Yes.
Who apparently, someone listening can probably set us straight, was associated with some of the Carthaginian gods. So he was a Semitic god, right? Like the Baals of the Old Testament.
Yes.
And so the Carthaginian people, Phoenicians, were coming from the Levant, right? From
Right.
the area of Palestine. They go west to what is today Tunisia. They found the city of Carthage, 8th century BC. And so then in Libya, Zeus Ammon, right, is a mixture of a Greek god and some kind of Semitic god. And of course, the famous story is Alexander arrives at that temple. It's as far west as he went in the desert sands.
Right.
And he goes up the steps, and the priest comes out and says something to him like, he greets him, Chaira Teknon, something like that, or Chaira Huya, greetings child or greetings son.
Yes.
And whether he's just, this is how you typically say hello to a young kid who's sightseeing at the temple, or whether he believes that Alexander is the son of Zeus Ammon, the story is Alexander took it as, well, I'm divine.
Right.
Because the priest called me son of the god.
Right.
So thereafter, the coinage, he's got these horns, right? We could throw an image up here. He's got these horns on his head of what it looks like to be Zeus Ammon.
Exactly right. And so, I mean, so coins is one of the more rapid ways in antiquity to kind of spread a political message, right? So he also depicted himself with the lion skin of Heracles over his head, right? So I mean, all these ways of kind of connecting him to the divine wherever he might be.
Correct.
Yeah.
So then you're saying in the Quran, he's called a Zulkarnain,
yes,
right?
the two-horned one.
The one with two horns.
Right.
And there's a positive depiction.
Yes. Now, I take it in the kind of this argument, this is a very thin thread to grab onto.
Okay.
But the idea is that kind of the memory of Alexander and in Islamic Alexandria kind of hangs on and sticks around. And you have to kind of we're jumping centuries. You get down to kind of the 9th and the 10th centuries. Arab texts start to talk about the tomb of Alexander in Alexandria once again. And it seems
so the thin thread, if I may interrupt, is that this is taken to be some kind of evidence that maybe the archaeological or architectural, the building is still there.
It's still there, or there's something there.
If it's mentioned in the Arab texts.
Right. There's something there that the Muslims would venerate.
Okay.
Right. And the connection seems to be that 9th and the 10th centuries, there's this so-called Attarine Mosque.
Okay.
In Alexandria. There's a couple of engravings, we can maybe flash one on the screen, that survive of what was left of this mosque. Seems to be mentioned in the same breath or as the same thing as the tomb of Alexandria. Now, what exactly does
the tomb of Alexander?
Sorry,
yeah.
What does that mean? There's a later map that shows up, the so-called Braun and Hogenberg map from 1575, so much later.
Okay.
There's a detail in the middle of it. Now, again, this if you look at this map, it's as far as kind of pinpointing exact locations.
It's very hard to see.
It's hard to see.
I see a Denny's maybe.
There's a Denny's. There's a Walmart.
Right.
But
not much parking.
No, terrible parking. Who would want to go there? But not very useful as far as pinpointing an accurate place in the city. But there's in the center of it, there's this large edifice that Braun and Hoberg label as the mosque to the left of it, and then below it, the Domus Alexandria Magna, the home of Alexander the Great. So this combination of the Adarine Mosque and
this 1575 map,
the House of Alexander.
Right.
What does it mean?
Right.
Keep going later on. So down into the 19th century.
So now we're in 1823.
1823.
Right.
The Adarine Mosque has decayed. It's disappeared. It survives just in these engravings. And there's also this tradition that the prophet Daniel, from Judeo-Christian tradition, but also dovetails with Islam as well.
Right.
He's the prophet Daniel. Nabi Daniel is called in Islam. Comes to also be associated with Alexander.
Okay.
And so in kind of Arab traditions about kind of the arc of the life of Daniel, parallels many elements in the life of Alexander.
That's strange. That's brand new to me. I'd never heard that.
It is very strange, right? And so again, the question is, what do you make of it, right? It's kind of easy and dangerous to speculate about this. So there's something about maybe this Adarine Mosque was dedicated to Daniel.
Okay.
But in the Arab tradition, Daniel and Alexander are the same.
They're treated
guy?
as very similar, overlapping stories.
Overlapping stories, right? And again, it might have something to do with that place in the Adarine Mosque was a place of veneration for Alexander in Alexandria, which might suggest that there's some kind of archaeological connection there. Right.
So I grew up in a rural part of Michigan.
Yes.
And none of the houses in my neighborhood, well, first of all, they were all quite far apart, quarter of a mile or more. But none of them were more than 150 years old because, European settlers didn't live in Michigan, rural Michigan, very early, right?
Yeah.
But there were a number of houses that had burned down, right? And you could see the foundations, and they're covered with mossy stones and so forth.
Yeah.
And I remember walking by them as a child, and or as children, and putting together stories in my own mind, things that I had heard or things I thought my parents had told me about who lived there and what was going on.
Right.
And that can quickly grow into a kind of a mythology.
Urban legend.
Right. It was a haunted house, or so-and-so lived there. And
right.
This was this is where the torso pile was and things like that. That's Simpsons reference.
right.
The torso heap. There's the torso heap.
Torso heap. Right. So I take it from your
same
anecdote.
kind of thing, right?
So I take it you're kind of skeptical about a lot of
I'm skeptical because I don't think I had good information on any of the things I was told.
Gotcha.
But my main point is it's not surprising, especially here I'm going to sound a little bit chronologically snobbish, in a pre-literate society, that people would forget what buildings represented and with whom they were associated.
Sure.
And as hundreds of years go by, they start to think that this building belonged to Daniel, maybe instead of Alexander.
Right.
And who can keep track of all this
Exactly.
stuff? Who can keep it straight?
Right, exactly. So I think you do have to kind of approach this with, it's fun to kind of dive into the story, but you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt. So, interesting fun fact: Schliemann, of one of our early.
No, you mean Schliemann.
Schliemann.
Right.
He applied to dig there. He wanted to find Alexander's tomb. Does that surprise anybody?
To whom did he apply?
I don't know. Whoever was in charge there.
The Turkish?
The Caliphate.
Were the Ottomans in charge of
I believe it was
Egypt?
Yes, the Ottomans. Yes, still at that point.
So here's a good point to say that the code for ratio is 6567.
6567.
We should look meaningfully at the camera. It's
6567.
Maybe flash it up here. Enough said.
So Schliemann wanted to dig there in 1888. Got the stiff arm. Right.
That's no good. He would have found something.
Oh, he would have found something, even if it was
not
fake.
Found it, he'd have made it
He
up.
would have made it up. Right.
He'd have found that nose.
Yes. Yeah, he would have
The one
found
that
that
Augustus broke off and tried to dump back in without anybody noticing.
Exactly. Oh man, that's a story waiting to be written. So now, what makes this really interesting? So in this engraving, which if you're watching this, we can show on the screen. Of the Adarine Mosque, you can see in the middle, underneath this little kind of dome chapel, you can see a little sarcophagus in there. And this sarcophagus was later found, and it was part of the same time Lord Elgin is taking away the Parthenon marbles, and Napoleon's gathering up stuff for the
Early
Louvre.
19th century.
Early 19th century. This was found, and it's the sarcophagus of Nectanebo II by translating the hieroglyphs. So the idea is that
by translating hieroglyphs, you say.
you can say this was the sarcophagus intended for that
Owl, bird, crocodile.
eye.
Right.
That's
Nectanebo.
Nectanebo. Who, if you remember, that was the empty tomb that Alexander was originally buried in.
Okay.
So the idea is that, he was originally placed in that coffin.
Right.
That coffin was brought north to Alexandria and remained there to the point where it was found, and now you can see it in the British Museum.
Where all good things go.
Right. So if you look at the sarcophagus, there are these holes drilled in the bottom, and it seems to have been used as kind of a purification bath for people worshiping at the mosque there. And so it's the mosque of Nabi Daniel, but it's the sarcophagus that Alexander's body maybe was in. You could see it's creating more questions than it's answering, right? But it's all intriguing. It's all kind of
Very
thin
intriguing.
archaeological evidence that's kind of pointing towards perhaps something. All right,
So we gotta be on the downslope here, right?
we do. All right,
So are we up to Napoleon yet?
we got to get to Napoleon.
Okay.
So Napoleon comes along. Late 18th century, early 19th century, he's fighting with the English over Egypt, and it's kind of going back and forth. But Napoleon, he's got kind of part of this Greek fever that a lot of people have, in the Egypt fever. And in 1798, he maps Alexandria, the medieval city of Alexandria, and that's a map that survives. And so we know from ancient sources, as loose as they are, that wherever Alexandria's tomb was in the city, it was somewhere near kind of the main crossroads.
Okay.
The Cardo and Decumanus of the city.
So to speak.
Right. So the question is, okay, if that's true, how do you find that? Given Alexander's map, given the modern city, where do you even start to look for the center? Right. And so in Napoleon's map, the very eastern edge of the city, he maps as the so-called Sun Gate, which is kind of the far eastern part of
Where
the
the
city.
sun rises in the east.
Yes, right. And then later exploration showed that the medieval city was much, much smaller than what the ancient city was. And so the suggestion is that the Sun Gate, which is the eastern edge of the medieval city, is actually quite near where the center of the city was. And Chug makes a big deal of this. Is there's this painting called I think it's called the Rosetta Gate or something like that.
Luigi Meyer.
Right. And this from 1801, and this gate, none of this, what you see in the painting, no longer survived. This has all been destroyed in the remodeling of the city. But if you look at this is the so-called Rosetta or the Sun Gate.
Okay.
And if you look at in the painting,
Yeah, we should put this up on the screen.
yes, it seems to be they're classical remains.
Right.
And so the gate is kind of incorporated. You see, the medieval wall kind of builds itself into
And the niches.
into a Hellenistic structure.
Where
Right.
you would have placed the statues.
So you see the statue niches, you see kind of these large Corinthian columns. So Chuck suggests is that what you see there is the remnant of the enclosure of Alexander's tomb. And so, and again, if you overlay, and archaeologically, we have a better idea of kind of the size and shape of ancient Alexandria. And if you overlay
than medieval, or
and if you overlap that with Napoleon's medieval map, indeed, that Sun Gate seems to be quite near where the center of the city was. Now we still, it's. I mean, that makes it sound like, oh, we can pinpoint it, with GPS. No, I mean the modern city is so different.
Right.
It doesn't give you a clue. And it's notoriously hard to dig there.
Right. But you do hear these stories, right? I think it's 3 to 5 years ago, I read a news story. Amateur archaeologist in Italy was just surveying the countryside using Google Maps, right?
Yeah.
A satellite image, and discovered the outlines of a Roman villa not far from where he lived, which no one had known was there.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and went and dug it up, and there it was, right? So this is open to anybody, this kind of checking out from satellite images where things might be situated.
Sure, and then add to that, there are advancements in things like LiDAR, using laser kind of mapping.
You're just making that up.
No. It stands for something. Laser something.
Okay.
But doing kind of ground penetrating radar without having to disturb the landscape, and you can kind of see well below the surface.
So where does that leave us, Jeff?
Well, there's Chug suggests a couple of places in the modern city where if we're going to find remnants of not the body but maybe the tomb.
But I want to find the body.
We all want to find the body.
I want to find the nose.
Right. So it's places where you might find kind of remnants of the enclosure. But Chug has this very kind of interesting suggestion.
Okay.
He suggests that there might be another place to look for the body.
Okay.
And so he talks about how as Alexandria becomes Christianized.
Right.
There is a set of mummified remains that comes to be associated with Mark, the gospel writer, who by tradition goes to Alexandria. As
also the patron saint of Venice.
Yes, right, and that's the interesting thing.
Okay.
And so there's evidence that this sanctified, mummified remains of Mark is smuggled out of Alexandria before kind of the Arabs get a hold of it.
Right.
And they take it to Venice and they place it in the St. Mark's Cathedral, which you can see there with all the pigeons there
Right.
in the famous square there. Now, there are traditions that Mark's body was burned by pagans, but Chug, he says, why would Mark's body have been mummified?
Right.
That's not a Christian burial,
thing to do.
right?
No, he's typically just buried.
Right. So, but the tradition is that this mummified remains was taken and buried in Venice, thinking this is the body of Mark the Evangelist. So he suggests there might have been, again, one of these
A mistake.
or one of these convergences of association.
So someone picked up Alexander's mummified body,
Yes.
thinking it was Mark.
I think it was Mark's, or saying this was venerated. Let's transfer that veneration from Alexander, or whoever
Yeah.
this is,
Right.
to a Christian figure.
in a similar way in which Ptolemy stole the body.
Exactly right, and also in a similar way that the Muslims perhaps associated Daniel with Alexander. Kind of
Right.
this merging of sanctity.
Yeah, you like this kind of stuff, don't
I
you?
do. I mean, I
know.
don't fully buy
Let's
it.
throw in some liminality here.
Well, we don't have to go that far.
Okay, all
But I
right.
mean, Chug goes so far as he says, "Let's open that thing up and
See what's down there.
let's do some DNA.
well,
Let's do
in the interesting suggestion, in the third Raiders of the Lost Ark movie, Indiana Jones movie,
Yes.
right? Which is not Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's Last Crusade.
Last Crusade. Yes,
The beginning of that is in the square of St. Mark's in Venice.
That's
And
right.
The square collapses or something, and
they go down in the sewers, right? Yes.
I don't remember all the details. There's a boat involved and such, but
Yeah.
it's apropos of this conversation because something's down there.
Yes, exactly. Right. So,
All right.
I don't know if I go as far as Chug as
Okay.
let's crack the sarcophagus open and poke around down there, but it's at the very least an intriguing, fascinating suggestion.
If they did, he'd be on History Channel.
Absolutely.
He'd have a second book,
Yes, he would.
maybe a movie.
Maybe that's what he's angling
I don't
for,
know.
Right.
Maybe we could get him on the podcast.
Yeah. But we're up against the clock.
Yes,
aren't
we are.
We got to get out of here.
All right, so we got some people to thank.
As always.
We want to thank Mishka Fernando,
Yes.
who is our wonderful sound engineer, puts this all together so nicely, and is putting together the video edition
Excellent.
for the
Yes.
first time.
Yes, we're excited about this, if a little nervous about it.
I'm more than a little nervous. For the first time, we're going to thank Agricola.
Agricola.
Yeah, code name.
Code name for...
the guy who's doing the filming.
Oh, that's right. Agricola. I got you.
Agricola,
I got you. Yes,
right,
yes.
Who's filming for us this evening.
Yep.
And we got to thank what?
Scott Van Zen.
Yes.
Ken Tamplin for the great music.
Fantastic guitarist. Ken runs an online vocal academy. How to sing better than anyone else.
Yeah.
And Scott's got a new album out. And who else do we need to thank? The listeners?
We should probably thank the listeners.
Should we? What should we thank them for?
Well, we should thank them for their dedication, for
Right.
coming back week after week, right?
We should ask them maybe to leave a review.
Yes, right. You can write to Dave at...
Well, that's not leaving a review.
that's
sending us feedback.
that's right. So a review on their favorite platform,
Which is probably Apple or Google or something
Spotify,
like that.
something like
Exactly.
that. If they have suggestions, questions,
Yes.
if you want a shout out, you can write to Dave at adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V. Or write to me,
Jeff at adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V.
Right.
You gonna make the V sign?
V, just
All
like
right.
that. And Dave, what do we got coming up next week?
Next week, which is episode number 66, we are going to have my daughter, Jillian Noe, on
Yes.
the show. And she's going to talk to us about Harry Potter.
Harry Potter and maybe some Percy Jackson too?
Wait a minute. She's going to talk to us about Percy Jackson.
Percy Jackson!
And
Yes.
maybe throw in some Harry Potter. I think the angle we're going to take, the approach, should be, how does a young classicist, how does she get interested in the study of Greek and Latin, and how the Percy Jackson series sparked and developed that interest?
Yes.
Should be really, really entertaining.
It's going to be fun. I can't
Should
wait.
be a lot of fun.
Right. And Dave, you got our gustatory parting shot?
I do. This comes from Sun Tzu,
Yeah?
The Art of War.
Wait,
Now,
he talked about food?
well, I'm going to say that I don't think this quote is necessarily as Sun Tzu originally intended it.
Yes.
But I think it fits very nicely into our gustatory theme.
Okay.
And Sun Tzu says, defeat your enemy from within. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.